the single man or the single mom, single woman, or whoever it is, like living by yourself during COVID, you couldn't go a lot of places. Like,
Right.
that's different. You
It's,
can't see.
If I would have been known trying to
we saw an uptick in couples counseling because people were stuck in the house together, right?
a little different. I don't know what it is, but you sound a little different and your mind a little different.
It's much easier to deal with someone who cries every day than it is to actually deal with someone who wants to cry but can't, because that means that there are some things that are even deeper than maybe that person even realizes.
Started out pursuing God, then my interest got divided.
Welcome into another episode of 365 Convo. We're here talking interesting topics with interesting people. Today's topic is mental health. I think in today's society, that's more talked about than it was, growing up in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. So we wanted to bring somebody on that has expertise in that field and also mental health and how it affects the Black community. So our next guest is a doctor, of course. We want to make sure we get the best and the brightest to answer these questions. So she went to the University of Georgia, got her bachelor's in risk management, then got her master's in professional counseling from Georgia State, and then back to the dogs to get her doctorate in counseling psychology. So she's been in the mental health industry for 17 years, and she's the owner and CEO of the Coaching Clinic Counseling and Consulting. So let's bring her on, Dr. Cassaundra Govan. What's going on, Dr. Govan?
How are you, Coach?
Hey, I'm doing all right. Man. I'm glad you took some time out of your schedule to come on and talk to us about this now, I ain't gonna say popular topic, but definitely more trending than it used to be with the growth of social media with mental health, right?
Yeah, definitely. I think COVID really hit it too. When
I
COVID
think you're
hit,
right. I think COVID brought a lot of that out, especially for those that didn't have family around. I don't think a lot of people thought about the people that just stay by themselves, whether it be grandma or the single man or the single mom, single woman, or whoever it is. Like living by yourself during COVID, you couldn't go a lot of places.
right?
That's different. You can't see.
And a funny fact is, we saw an uptick in couples counseling because people were stuck in the house together, right? So
wow, listen, we joked about that at work during COVID, because at my job we still was able to go in after a while and wear the mask and gloves and all that stuff. But then, there's people that were talking about how they was having problems at the house.
Yes.
Because now they was around their people all the time.
Time.
So that was a real thing, huh?
Yes. I mean, there was no break. Everything was in the house, and there were a lot of people with one foot in divorce court and one foot out. Yeah, it was bad. It got bad.
Listen, my advice is that's why you need to like your companion more than just as much as you love them. Because if you don't like them,
if y'all ain't friends, and I'm laughing because I just could think about at least 5 stories where I was like, oh Lord.
Wow, that's crazy to know. Like I say, we talked about that. People get, tired of the kids being in the house. Y'all got to go back to school.
That
kind of.
Listen, I said, I was like, I'll do anything to not be a teacher. Give me suicidal, homicidal, psychotic people seeing little green men fall out the sky. Anything but a teacher, because I was looking at that stuff and I don't know how they do it. I do not know how they do it.
There's no lie when we say teachers are superheroes, so they have to do that every single day. You don't want to deal with your own kids every single day, so you got to think about them dealing with your kids every single
I don't, and I love my kids, but I don't either. I ain't gonna lie to you. I was like, I can't be a stay-at-home mom. I don't know how people do that.
Listen, I can tell you this: during COVID, I pretty much did, my son's schooling, and because I was at home for a big part of that. It's different. This is every day having because he was in 3rd grade at the time, and I'm like, all right, let's do your work. Good thing I feel confident in my own academic background, saying that I could do that, because not everybody is like that.
Listen, I'm telling you, I was gonna send to DeKalb County a request for a 1099 because I felt like I had earned I was like, y'all need to pay me because
Big facts, big facts, big facts. So before we actually jump into the topic of mental health and how it affects the Black community, tell it just quickly tell the people what you do at the coaching clinic, counseling and consulting.
That's a broad question. So what do I do in my private practice? Mainly right now, I see clients, right, for therapy. I see families, I see couples, I see individual.
Okay.
I consult a lot too. So what that would entail is people calling me in to ask for help with certain situations. Let's say, the police department. I can consult with them if something's going on. Believe it or not, churches are reaching out a lot more.
Wow.
Yeah, so I know we're going to kind of get to that in a little bit, but churches are seeing an increased level of mental health. And so I'm asked a lot, how to handle those type of things. So do a lot of consulting and coaching. So I really, I really don't like life coaches, because I feel like, if you log on to any social media, you'll see like a little advertisement where you can become a life coach for $5.99. And somehow that makes people think that they can actually do my job, right?
Right.
So I actually threw coaching into the title of my business because I wanted people to understand that, you know, don't how do I say this nicely? That's our area, right? Now I'm all
Right.
for people wanting to, help guide someone or maybe even help hold people accountable. But I think life coaches, like they really step on the line when they start trying to talk about mental health and diagnosing and different things. So
Mm.
that's really why the coaching part is in the title, if that makes
Well,
sense.
yeah, it does. And I mean, you can turn on any social media and you see somebody trying to tell you how to get it better in life or whatever it is. So
Everybody. Yeah.
I empathize with you, because that is like, that's kind of like a parent in the stands when I'm coaching basketball, thinking they can, because they, can do it better than I can do it when they really can't. But that's for another day, another show. So let's go ahead
I
and
get
let's go ahead and jump into it. So we grew up in around the same time because we was at Georgia around the same time, and in our generation, mental health meant somebody was crazy. That's how, and we didn't, in our families, in the African American household, we wasn't allowed to be that. We was just, there's a stigma to say the least when it comes to Africa. I mean, it's getting better, I think, and you can speak more on that, but I just think there's always this negative connotation with mental health and seeking someone of your profession to talk to. Why do you think that is?
Absolutely. So I think so when you think about that old adage, what goes on in the house stays in the house, right? So so first of all, there's a lot of stuff that happened when we were growing up and even after that people just didn't talk about, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
everyone knew about that one family member that was a little touched, that nobody wanted their children to be around at the barbecue, right?
Right.
So, but yet in the family, I never understood like why does he keep getting invited to the barbecue? Like if it's like if you
He
all
family.
know, right? So that kind of speaks to part of it, right? So
Yeah.
we handle it in house, then you add on, historically African Americans have, really leaned on our spirituality to understand a lot of things, right? So I think the message that came from the church historically was that we needed to pray about it. And what
Right.
was toxic about that wasn't that we needed to pray about it, but it was that if you're still struggling, that means that you weren't praying hard enough or your faith isn't strong enough, right? And so
Mm.
then what does that do? It makes people not want to say anything because if I prayed about it and I'm still struggling, then what does that say about me? So now it it led to a lot of people suffering in silence. So I think that again, and I would say the third part to that is mental health is not tangible. What I mean by that is when you go to the doctor, if you have a broken leg, that's obvious. They can put
Mm-hmm.
it under an X-ray, you can see a broken leg. So most physical conditions actually can, either they can run some tests or they can look at a scan and they can tell what's wrong. Well, mental health is dealing with the brain. So it's not that simple. And so what happens when people can't quite explain something or they don't understand it, then they try to trivialize it, or we're just not going to talk about it. And I think that's a lot of where it comes from too, is the discomfort around something that is real but intangible, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think so too. Like you said, you can if we can touch it, especially I can speak from a guy's perspective. It's just like being in the house, like when it comes to like if you want me to fix the sink, even if I don't know how to do it, it's something I can figure out, I can touch it, I can do it, but if you want me to be more open with my emotions, if I'm not that kind of guy, you like, what do you mean? Like I tell you, I told you about my day. Like, what do you mean? You know what I'm saying? So it's harder. And I think with the Black families, we see mental health as a weakness. Is that what you kind of noticed in your, in your time being a doctor?
I think, what's interesting is, yes. So I would say that. I think what's really interesting about African Americans is this term weakness and what it really means. We look at crying as weak. We look
Right.
at, having any emotion other than anger is weak. Like there's so much, stuff that's weak, or nowadays you being real sassy, right? So
Listen, oh my goodness.
so yeah. And for me, doing what I do, I try to educate people on, what that really means. And I don't know if we're going to get into it, so, I can hold off on the statement I
No,
was
you can
about to.
go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I think, when I talk to people about what it means to be weak,
Okay.
honestly, it actually takes a lot of strength to come forward and say something's wrong with you, on any level, right? So I think that it's weak for someone to be, suffering with something and be afraid to talk about it, right? Because it really does take a lot of courage to say, I don't know what's wrong with me, but I know I'm not the same. Like I know something is different and I can't figure it out, and it's impacting me in really, multiple ways. So I try to get people to understand what weak really looks like, right? And
I
what
think
I
that's a
tell
good
people
way to look at it.
and what I tell people about crying is, when we came out of our mom's womb, how did they know that we were alive? What was the telltale sign?
Crying.
Crying.
Right.
So crying is more of a sign that you're alive than it is that you're weak, because that's literally the first way that they knew, like, you're okay. And if you weren't crying, then they had to go into crisis mode and try to figure out what was going on. So I really encourage people to think about it from that standpoint. Like if you're not crying, something might be wrong. And actually in our field, when we ask people, like, do you cry every day? Do you cry a little bit, or do you want to cry but you can't? Which answer do you think is the worst?
I think when they say they want to cry but they can't.
It is. It's much easier to deal with someone who cries every day than it is to actually deal with someone who wants to cry but can't, because that means that there are some things that are even deeper than maybe that person even realizes.
Right. And then I ain't gonna lie, especially as a Black man, we've always been like men in general, but especially Black men, like, crying again, like you said, first define weak, but that's what we've been told. It's weakness. We don't cry, stop, it don't hurt that bad, or it's not that bad. I've been guilty of that here and there, not myself per se, but like with my son, depends on, what he crying about. If I think it's something he
Right.
should be
Now,
crying
please
about, like,
understand, I am not encouraged. I have a son too. I'm
I'm
not
like, if you
encouraging.
crying because you just lost that game, though, like we're not doing that. That's just how I'm like, come on, bro. Like we gotta be better
Well,
than
I
that.
mean, we done seen some grown men cry on
Right, right.
national TV after losing the game, so let's not do that. I mean, boo-hoo, that ugly snot cry, I mean, so and my son's an athlete too, so I think I make room for that. But if you're
Yeah.
crying about, I can't even think of something, but for me, it's how long you cry, Now I'm gonna give you a little, I'm gonna give you your space to feel
Right,
your feelings, right?
right.
But then we're gonna clean that up, and now we got to come up with plan B. So that's my
Okay.
thing always, is never wanting to stunt anyone from being able to express how they really feel, but teaching them that within boundaries, right? You can't go walk around here all day crying. Like that's not
Right,
cool.
right. That's what I'm saying. Like we're
Yeah.
I get it. I get it. So, with that stigma that we grew up with, whether it be crying or just going to see somebody about, your mental health, how can we? I know how you, as a doctor, at least, you get to interact with these patients, but how can like regular people like myself, help change the narrative that mental health and going to see somebody or going to talk to somebody about it is okay? It's normal.
That's a good question. So first of all, and not just saying this because I'm on your podcast, but I strongly believe that doing things like we're doing right now is really, really helpful. It's March, and I've already had 4 speaking engagements about mental health, and I have a lot more lined up. So
Okay.
I think the more people put it out there, and so what we call it in our field is normalizing it, right? Making it
Yeah.
normal, like making this common, that this is something that everyone experiences. One thing I do tell people in a lot of talks is that all of us have symptoms, right? People always want to ask me, well, what are the symptoms? What are the signs? And I really don't like to get into symptoms and signs, for several reasons. One, because you guys Google everything. And
Right.
so like it's so freaking irritating. Like if I had $1 for every bipolar person that called, I could buy a new car. So I I don't like to get into signs and symptoms because just as soon as I do, they're gonna run to the internet and now diagnose
Mhm.
themselves, right? But what I will say is we all have symptoms of certain diagnoses, right? Let's talk about depression. So at
Okay.
some point, I would argue that everybody has experienced sadness. We've all experienced times where we didn't have as much energy as we once did, or maybe we were just in a fog where I just don't really feel like doing a whole lot, and maybe I used to be really, really active.
Okay.
Or I'm noticing that I'm overthinking things or I'm worrying a lot more than I normally do, right? So we all have symptoms of things. That doesn't necessarily mean that it meets the criteria for a diagnosis. But
Okay.
why it's important is to help people understand that, you know, most of us aren't really all that different, right? That we're all probably 1 or 2 episodes away from having some type of breakdown,
Breakdown.
you know what
All
it
right.
is, right? So I think the way we talk about it is really important. So I don't
Okay.
talk about it from the standpoint of you see little green men falling out the sky, right? But I do talk about
Right.
it from the standpoint that people can really relate to and resonate with, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does make sense. The frequency at which we, bring these topics up, like you say, on whether it be my podcast, your speaking engagements, or whatever, and how we talk about it. Again, that goes back to when we were kids. Again, in my hood, if somebody said mental health, we was, it was literally a place we was like, they at the crazy house. You know what I'm saying? Like
Yeah,
we didn't think it could have been, PTSD from, war or eating disorder or paranoid, whatever it is. It's like,
right, right.
but
Or
we
let
just
me
thought
let me let me
crazy.
hit Let me hit you with one that a lot of people don't realize, Coach. So under the mental health umbrella, we relate relationships, right? So I told
Mm,
you a big part of what I do is couples counseling, right? So
mhm.
so so helping people learn how to communicate effectively, helping people learn how to love each other in a way that is effective. Because sometimes we want to love people the way we want to love them, and that doesn't always translate to how they understand love, right? So all of that falls under mental health. All of that falls under what I do for a living. I'll be honest, I probably do more counseling with those topics and scenarios than I do with, more severe diagnoses like schizophrenia or bipolar.
Mm. I got a follow-up question. And I was thinking about this earlier, like, because I mentioned this to my god sister. I was like, most of the time, with black people, we only go to counseling when it's court ordered or right before you get married, when they say, you gotta
You-
come go to a
It's
couple.
gonna take some money off your certificate if you come.
Right, you know what I'm saying? But it's like in counseling, as a doctor, it's like I know, and this is again, I haven't been in counseling, so I don't know if you actually tell people this, but we see it on TV. They say this is a safe space. You can
Mhm.
say whatever. The problem, or not problem, the question that I would have, I would say, if a couple comes in and they say this is a safe space, the problem with that is when you leave, you still remember what the other person said in that room. So yeah, it's a safe space in there. But if we're going home to the same domicile, you know what I'm saying? It's like, I remember that you said my cooking wasn't good. Now, what's up with that? You know what I'm saying? How do you
Man,
handle that? Because
listen,
you getting these guys on repeat visits and stuff. You know,
listen, that is a great. I'm laughing because I can just think about like at least 7 couples where my colleagues thought we was all. They thought a fight was about to break out in the office, right? Because it gets really heated. So for me, and I feel like I'm telling you all my little secrets. I don't want no therapist to be stealing my stuff, but for me, what I do, what I do when I'm working with couples, especially early on in the sessions, is I encourage them to not have these conversations outside of therapy, right? So what they do is like, and so it actually gives men mostly a lot of get out of jail free cards, right? Because as soon as she starts to talk about it, then he's gonna be like, now remember what Dr. G said, right?
right?
Or what they do is, but I would feel much more comfortable talking about this in front of Dr. G. And so it kind of, it kind of shuts the conversation down. And for those situations where the person, whomever, pushes and pushes, I guarantee you when they come back to therapy the next week, they're gonna tell it. They're gonna tell it all.
Yeah, everybody's snitching. Everybody's snitching.
At that point, then I step in and let them know you are impeding this process. You're gonna make this process a lot more tedious, a lot longer. If and I mean, not to say, my clients. If you could ever interview clients, they're gonna tell you Dr. G is real as they come, right? So I tell them, like, if you knew what you were doing, you wouldn't need me. So because you're here, then I'm gonna strongly encourage you to do things in the way that I'm asking you to do it, because there's a reason for everything I'm asking you to do. And most times that's enough. Most times it's enough. And so they always raise the red flag of we're gonna talk about this in front of Dr. G. And so that kind of helps. Not because trust me, a lot of stuff comes out. But I think the other thing is, for me, I always encourage people to share as much or as little as they feel comfortable. Because what happens sometimes is, even like with individual counseling, people will come in and they will share things with me that maybe they've never told anybody. And then when they leave, they feel really exposed. And then it actually makes it harder for them to want to come back, right? Because now, what is she thinking about me? What does all this mean? And so for me, the first few sessions, I always tell them, like, I want you to share as much or as little as you feel comfortable, understanding that I get that there's so much to unpack, right? And we're not going to be able to unpack it all in one session. So let's stair step it. But also, Coach, people don't realize I'm also teaching them how to set boundaries, right? Because what happens is, a lot of times people, one of my B words is boundaries. Like, a lot of people have discomfort because they don't have really good, healthy boundaries, right? So part of me showing them that you don't have to share everything all at once is also teaching them how to establish boundaries in other areas of their life, if that makes sense.
Okay. Listen, that all of that makes sense. You know what I'm saying? I especially with boundaries. I think some people don't have any boundaries and they need to.
And then the crazy part is, some people's boundaries are so so stringent. Like, I don't even know how they fit into the boundary. It's like, you like, it's just like, come on, we gotta loosen up a little bit, right? So boundaries is an issue for a lot of people.
So in your experience, and we can even just talk about the relationship, the couples counseling part of it. In your experience, like, how do you see different races attack, going to see someone, or mental health, or things like do you get a lot of African American couples come in?
I do. So interesting enough, I was just I just did a talk at Georgia last week, and I was getting my makeup done. And most times when I'm out somewhere, I don't like to tell people what I do for a living, because it ends up being a group therapy session wherever I am, right?
You like, nah, I'm off the clock. You want to talk about this?
And you can, like, people who know me know, I'll tell somebody I do underwater basket weaving, like that's what I do, right? But this particular situation, the young lady was asking me, why was I getting so dolled up on a Tuesday, and everything. And so I was telling her what I did. And through talking to her, she was like, oh my God, I think I'm dealing with that, right? And she was like, I've been trying to find a Black female therapist forever. Like, where are y'all? And I'm like, well, we're 1% of 1%, right? So like we are really, really small in terms of numbers. But I think when people realize that there's a Black woman who actually is in mental health, it makes them feel a lot more comfortable. So then what happens is tell a friend to tell a friend, right? Majority of my clientele has been built because of word of mouth, because somebody found me somehow, and then they went and told. Like, I think at one point I felt like I was darn near seeing the whole neighborhood, like they all live next door to each other, I was like, what in the world? But because it's not that many of us, I stay busy. Sometimes I have to tell people no, because again, there's not that many of us. And then we're not all created equal. And what I mean by that is not all of us are good. So be careful. Just because someone has doctor in front of their name or some letters behind their name doesn't necessarily make them a great candidate. And a lot of my clients have come in and said that, I've been to 2 different therapists and they sucked, right? And so that happens a lot. And to be honest, I think if I could teach therapists anything, is people want to know, like, what would it be like to sit in a room with Dr. G? Like they just kind of want to get a feel for that. So the more that you can be yourself, and the more that you can let people get a feel for your personality, the more comfortable they feel, to be honest.
Now we have some other stuff to get to, but before we do, that's a question that I had. Like, so if you don't know anybody personally that has seen, has gotten therapy or seen or knows a doctor that's really good, how do you go about, like, if you say, you know what, I need to see somebody about whatever, relationship counseling or personal, whatever, how do you go about narrowing it down? Like, even if you're looking for a doctor, a pediatrician, you gotta be like, word of mouth is always the best, otherwise it's just like, let me look at your credentials, let me look at where you, if you Black, white, whatever, it's like, whatever I'm dealing with, are you married, if I'm trying to get marriage counseling, whatever, I don't know. It's like, how do you find somebody?
Yeah, so I mean, the first step is you can talk to your doctor. I mean, most doctors, it's like a network, right? So most of us where we collaborate with each other, or we refer to each other. So I would say you can always start with your doctor. Little known fact, nowadays doctors and nurses are being but they are responsible for asking patients, are you safe at home? So I don't know if you noticed those questions, right? Are you safe at home? There are certain questions that they all have to ask now, because again, it has not been where, people even ask that question. So sometimes people don't feel like they can even disclose that information, so you can always start with your, mental health provider. You can, your pediatrician, because psychologists, we also do testing for ADHD and learning disabilities, right? So if you suspect that your child may, be struggling in school, you can always start with your pediatrician, and they have referral sources.
Okay, that's good
That's
to
the
know, because like I
easiest way. I
say,
mean, I could go into a lot of stuff that most people
I
won't,
mean,
but
like you say your doctor, but this is also dealing with the Black community, not just
they
with
don't
the
go to the
mental health,
doctor,
but
right?
physical health. We don't go to like, even if we do, we go to general practitioners. Like, I'm gonna be honest with you, I don't have, like, you asked me, Coach, who your doctor? I don't have a doctor. I don't have a doctor. I go to the doctor. You see what I'm saying?
Well, whichever doctor you go to, they should also.
I have a dentist. I have a dentist. Like, I know I go to the same guy for dentistry, but I don't
Right.
have a doctor. You know
And
what I'm saying?
they have referrals too, like that.
Okay,
Like, so anything in the medical field,
I got you.
I would venture to say, if they don't, then there might be something,
Oh, red flag.
problematic. If you go to someone who's in the mental health, the medical profession, and they don't have a referral, it's like, ugh, because most of us, even if not, we can call somebody to call somebody, right? Because that's our network. So I may not know, a neonatologist, but I can make 3 calls and probably find you one, right? So
Right.
and if I can't, then you should look at me differently. Like
I got
something's
you. I
up,
got you.
if that makes
I
sense,
got
right?
you.
It's
I
6
got you.
degrees of separation. So something's really wrong if I can't at least call somebody and get the information. So
That makes sense. That makes
and if
sense. So
not, I would say too, there are a lot of churches even specifically mega churches that are starting to really recognize and understand the importance of mental health. So, um, Bishop Paul S. Morton, he's a huge pastor of a mega church. He actually suffered from some mental health issues earlier on, and because of it, he has made a lot of collaboration with mental health professionals in the community, me being one of them, right? So he actually years ago ordained me as a chaplain for that reason, right? Not necessarily because don't come to me. I'm not necessarily know if I can save your soul and you can go to heaven. Doesn't but if you stand on top of Stone Mountain about to jump, then yes, call me. I might be able to help you, talk your way down. So basically what would happen is if they did have someone coming in and a lot of times they start with I just need prayer. And through the conversation, you find out that this person is really, really suffering, right? And so depending on how bad the situation is, then they would actually call me or call a mental health professional in so that I can help walk them through what the next step is going to be. So for me, for him and a lot of them, it's the both and. So we're going to pray for you while Dr. Govan is on her way to come help, so it's not either or, it's both and.
Getting the best of both worlds. I guess you're getting
Yeah.
the best of both worlds. So
Yeah.
listen, man, time flies when you talk about something interesting. It's like we up on it. But what I want to ask you before we get out of here is, other than relationship counseling, what do you see as the most prevalent or I guess the biggest mental illness issue in the Black community? If there is trauma. Now, is that just trauma from childhood, or what kind of trauma?
All of it. So what kind of we had all been traumatized. Like so trauma. So I think when we say trauma, people initially think of sexual trauma, right? They think of maybe physical trauma where someone has been physically abused or any type of abuse, right? But there's so many other ways that people experience trauma. So for me, I was a late bloomer. I didn't get my license until like I was 20, right? And so literally within 7 months of having my license, I had been in 4 car accidents and 3 were total, right? So at that point, like my uncle was like, "We're gonna get you a bus pass because something is really wrong." But the point is, I actually started experiencing PTSD. So like if I'm in a car with someone and like even to this day, 25 years later, if you slam on brakes, I'm going to freeze up. My body will tense up, right? So that's trauma. So there's so many ways that we can experience trauma, and it's not always through abuse per se. So trauma to me is what I see a lot of. And I'll say trauma actually has a huge impact on relationships, especially when people don't readily realize that, that's what's going on, or they don't see the link between the two.
So with the trauma, have you seen any patients or a lot of patients in the Black community that maybe, like, again, I grew up in the hood, what we would call the hood, less lower income, whatever. If you see in like whatever you see on a daily basis that kids probably shouldn't see, whether it be, violence that may have resulted in a murder or drugs being sold, it's like, even if you didn't go into that life, could that be like a type of trauma that you see?
Absolutely. So it's interesting. I know you talked about kids, but I'll use this analogy. I work with fire and police, and they become very desensitized, right? Because you can imagine the stuff that they see on a daily basis. They see some of the most horrific things that most of us pray that we never have a nightmare about, right? Like body decapitations, just body parts all over the expressway, right? So in order to continue to do that job on some level, like your body kind of goes into a protect mode where you don't feel. And what I have to explain to them is that's not compartmentalized. And what I mean by that is you're not just desensitized at work. When you go home, you're desensitized there too. So for example, I had a couple, the husband was a firefighter and the wife was a teacher. And so she would come home and she's telling him all about her day with the little kids and how stressful it is. And there was no respect, compassion given toward her, because in his mind, he just got off of a 24-hour shift where he didn't see any body parts and he didn't see, just really horrific things take place. And you want to talk to me about these 6-year-olds that are bouncing all over the room, right? And so they had problems really communicating, relating to each other, and then that translates to no sex, no, whatever else going on, right? And so that's like a really vivid way of how trauma, right, can then start to impact, other areas of your life. So a lot of times, like back to your point, when you talk about kids, like I was born in Chicago, right? So when you talk about kids that, hear gunshots, like we hear firecrackers on the 4th of July, it actually they're desensitized, and not because they want to be, and not because they are intentionally doing it, but because that's how the body works, right? You hear something enough, you see something enough, the shock value is not there. So then, it takes a whole lot for people like that sometimes to feel, right? To feel anything.
And
And
it can
so,
also affect your decision making.
oh,
Okay.
absolutely. Absolutely.
That's why.
Because
Is that why I'm telling my son not to wear Crocs when we go to a public event?
actually, I thought that was some really good advice, to be honest. I saw that episode and I was like, I actually told my son, I made my son watch it, because I was like, listen, you just never know. You got to be,
you got to stay ready. But Dr. G, is that how we grew up though? Like they don't grow up in that era, that same. That could be just how we grew up, and they like, what are you talking about? Like I've never literally been to an event where stuff breaks out. And when we grew up, we was at events all the time when stuff broke out.
I would say this. I think that there's a difference between being vigilant and being hyper vigilant, right?
I got you.
And so I think people kind of merge the two, right? It is very important to be vigilant. It's very important to be aware of your surroundings, understand, what the possibilities are, and try to prepare for them, but not to be hyper vigilant, like you barely want to go anywhere, right? So I think that because we have created a life for our children that is very different than, the one we grew up in, I realize for myself, sometimes there's certain conversations that I haven't had with my kids that I need to. So I would encourage people to, find a way. It's about a balance, right? And I think it's still important for us to teach our kids how to be prepared for anything that might take place.
Okay. Yeah, I feel like I'm in the vigilant category. I don't hyper, do it, because that day that he asked me, he ended up wearing them anyway. And because I told him I wasn't gonna make him wear, I told him, but I did try to stress why I would never do that. And since that one time, he hasn't worn them.
Right, and I think that's a really great approach. I think this generation, we didn't have a lot of choices, right? So like when we grew up, it was just we was told to do, and it was told because I said so, and that was it, right? I think this generation, that doesn't really work, right? So I think the more choices you can give them, it also helps them learn how to make healthy decisions for themselves, as opposed to us telling them what to do and then that's it. Because what you see later on in life is adults who don't know how to make healthy decisions because they've been told so much what to do their whole life.
Right. I got you. Okay. All right. So before we get out here, I got one last question for you. How do you turn it off? Being Dr. G. So when you go out, you know what I'm saying? You just out with the girls, you know what I'm saying? It's just about fun. It's about hanging with your girls, but you see something that you really want to say something. How you turn it off? How like you say, you telling people you're an underwater basket weaver. You know what I'm saying? How you like when you see something, you like, oh, I want to say something so bad.
So that's a great question. Earlier on in my career, I didn't know how to turn it off, right? I really didn't. Everything was therapy. Everything was, every time I sat down, I wanted to try to do counseling with everybody. And first, that really doesn't work. You lose a lot of friends and family like that. Because everybody's like, you're not going to therapize me. That's not even a word, but
right.
That's what they say, right?
That's what we say, yeah.
Or people stop talking around you because they think that you over there analyzing them, right? So
Right.
honestly, you can ask people if they've been around me. Most times I don't. Like I don't sit. My brain kind of shuts off. I don't sit around analyzing folk. I don't even have a real desire to do so, right? But I'll tell you, it's my kids that helped in that process, because when I come home, it's not Dr. G anymore. It's mommy.
Right.
And unfortunately, kids don't give a darn what what
And
you've
they
been
don't.
through, who came in and was about to kill themselves, who tried to blow their brains out, and you had to stop. They don't care nothing about none of that, right? They
What's for dinner? What's for dinner?
right. And mommy, let me tell you about what happened at school today, and how little Sally didn't want to talk to me, and that hurt my feelings. So I had to find a way to switch gears. And I think doing that for so long, it just kind of helps me do it in other settings too. And when I'm with my friends, I hate when conversations get deep, because then everybody looks at me like, okay, so Doc, what you gonna say? And I'm like, I'm listening too. I'm trying to I don't know all the answers. I'm trying to figure out what y'all saying.
You like, okay.
Right. I mean, we're human. We got problems just like everybody else. So I'm trying to get some advice. So I think
Right.
for me, I try to make light of it. Like, listen, I get it. Most people don't know a therapist, let alone have a therapist really close in their lives, right? So there is a time and place for it. But most of the people who I'm around, they know I don't like. I have to tell my mama, do not tell anybody what I do, and do not call me doctor anything when we go in this building. It's almost like the little thing that our parents used to say, don't touch nothing. Like, I have to give people that conversation. Like, not now.
Right.
And
I'm just here to have some drinks. I'm just here to have some drinks.
I'm just here to enjoy the SEC.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
You can call that enjoyable, but you get my drift. Like, I don't want to talk about that. Like, I don't want to talk about what y'all do for a living and all that.
I know. Next time we had this year when we had Georgia's playing in the SEC championship and we had the tailgate Kings thing, I'm gonna turn around and you say, "Well, why did he call that play? What was he thinking about?" No, I'm not gonna do that.
Listen, and then I be feeling bad because my reaction is not healthy at all. Like, I do a lot. And I just don't want people to be like, well, she's a doctor. How's she acting like that? Because I'm Sandy, and I'm human, and I'm pissed because they act, So that's another reason I really don't like being out in public, because I'm human too. So I'm not always in that mind frame, especially if I done had a couple of drinks, you probably don't want to talk to me, because what I'm gonna say might not be the most Dr. G thing to say.
I was about to say, Lord, don't be Dr. G on alcohol now. We don't need that.
Listen,
we don't need
she
to
already hell off of alcohol, so you really don't want to see what she like.
Right.
I try to tell people, listen, you don't want this smoke, I'm telling you, because I'm gonna tell you some stuff you don't really want to hear. So,
hey, but that's how it is. We definitely appreciate the conversation, Dr. G. Appreciate you coming on 365 Convo and talking about mental health. And so it's a lot of the little pieces of the conversation we could take other places, and we might have to have you back on. You know what I'm saying? So we definitely appreciate that. Appreciate what you do.
Say this too. I know you guys also have the Respect the Hedges, and so I've done so many things, but during my postdoc, I actually worked in sports psychology. So I worked with the men's and women's basketball team at Georgia State. And so that's a topic that I know you guys don't talk a lot about, but it's really, really prevalent. I don't know if you know, but a lot of D1 sports teams travel with psychologists now. So
yeah, that makes sense. I think another thing me and some of the fellas talked about is how to move from athlete to real world when playing days are over, and I know that would fall into your category. So definitely some things that we might have to dive into. So definitely appreciate your time and coming on. Everybody out there viewing 365 Convo, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And listen, if you need to find a doctor, like Dr. G said, you don't know nobody, ask your pediatrician, ask your dentist, ask your minister, your laser eye surgeon, whatever it is, somebody that's in the medical field or whatever. Because if they don't know anybody, at least that knows somebody that knows.
So you might need to get a new doctor.
You might need to go to a new dentist. So,
and also you can ask the school system. The school system actually has a list of every school has a list of therapists. So
okay. There it is. And we appreciate Dr. Cassaundra Govan coming on 365 Convo. And I'm your host, Isaiah. Until next time, we're out.
If I choose to leave his presence, then I get what I deserve. No excuses for my execution.